Am I right, Mike? I mean, you guys at Movement, I mean, we were fortunate enough to close one of the first TRID loans in the country on a purchase with Movement Mortgage, and their systems are unbelievable. But not everybody's systems are as good and as quick and as efficient. So it makes it difficult. Mike, when do you typically want title ordered on the bank side?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was getting at, and it's like even when we were there talking about TRID. The most important thing is making sure that the expectations and the communication is there from the beginning with all parties, because I don't think there's a definite right or wrong answer on when to order it. I think, as we all know, when it looks like everything, as Victoria said, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, that's when it's there. So if the communication is there and we know that, the appraisal's in, the value's there, the file has been underwritten, the consumer is supposed to clear to close, which is done for us up front. I think that's important, as long as there's the right communication, because even if everything's cleared and it's not closing for another 30 days, we would want to make sure that the title's cleared, there's nothing outstanding, so there's no last minute things. So, but I agree with you. I think there needs to be some certain due diligence done up front. So if the consumer's underwritten, they're approved, and the main conditions are cleared, then that's when we would go ahead and proceed with title. And of course, getting back to what you guys said, earlier, it's important that you have the right title company that you utilize. That can get things done in an appropriate manner.
Okay, we are going to go to break. If you would like to join in on our conversation, or if you have a question, please give us a call at 914-693-5700.
I have three questions about the realtors, about the cost, about the whole bill. And one I'm surprised you didn't touch on is the underwriters. You could have XYZ abstract. You're not a title, you might be, but others like abstracts are just abstracts. And they go to,
Well, when we talk about TRID, I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, well, we got to move it. I want to hit realtors. Why, in this area, why?
Katha's gone.
She's gone?
Yeah, she's gone. Why do, realtors just stay away?
Somebody from Arizona.
If you want to play
on the phone,
why are they involved?
Not a realtor,
no.
but
Well,
just
in New York,
agreeing that the buyer's
the attorneys are really
attorney always orders the
but
title.
realtors drive people around their Buicks unaware of
Yeah,
the
but
biggest
you're
cost.
always asking that same question, and you know what? A very good broker does stay
But a
involved.
consumer cares
But-
about that. The next time.
So once
they-
again, the same answer that I say every single week
Yeah, but every
is
question is because.
The problem is that the realtors don't know what they're doing all the time.
Oh,
right,
exactly.
and
So
you
I
really
want
have
to
to
know.
choose the right broker that you're going to deal
But
with.
even the right, if you want to take, like you think, let's say Sidon does most deals. You think he makes people aware of title, the existence?
I don't know.
No way.
There
I don't know
he
either.
could,
No
he could
way.
not. There are a few that do.
Because if you think
and for
about it,
the
they're
most part,
letting
they do
their
not.
clients.
I'll be honest, I told the realtors, do me a favor, send me the contract and take a step back.
Leave me alone, because I know what I'm doing. This is my
That's
game.
contract. I'm talking about when they're driving in the Buick.
I don't care about that.
What do you mean? That means when they have a contract, once the lawyer does
I like
nothing.
to think that the realtors are driving in the Mercedes.
I'll tell you how I did it and how it was done and is done. When you're in contract, you don't know
Don't
that
beat
at
up the
some
realtors,
point.
okay? Because
I'm not gonna-
It's a consumer show.
No,
I
I wanna-
understand, but once again, you ask the same question every single week, and my
It's a valid
answer is,
question.
you have
So
to
we're
choose
here-
the
What's the
right
question that
The
you
broker.
asked?
valid question is, why does a realtor say, oh, my client's got my offer accepted? They go to contract. You know damn well the lawyer doesn't ever mention title at the contract.
No, never.
When the client is like a month later, he gets a loan with Mike.
Mike is the one who first introduces it.
Well, maybe they do, but there
Wasting
wasn't
a lot
always
of
the
good
way.
radio here. 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, so let's.
It's all online.
So I have.
Good.
Can I get into also? I'm going to talk about.
Underwriter is a big
I'm going to
thing.
talk about the seller's agents or the agent
Well, we don't have
representing
time.
the seller.
6:42. How much
All
time?
right, I'm gonna turn it to you, talk to him.
Let's do. We could do.
12 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quid pro quo.
15.
And the cost. We have the four things: taxes.
Go into
Let's
the
keep cost
specifics.
out of the equation here.
Well, what's in it? They don't know what's in
Because
it.
now I'm wearing a nice shirt and it's my fault. I'm charging the consumer too much. We
Talking
did. We
about
talked
going to
about
Florida
rates.
and New York.
Yeah, check it.
And we're back. We have Mike Brennan from Movement Mortgage on the line with us. We have Glenn Asher here from Kensington Vanguard. And we have Scott Forsino in the house. And we are talking about title insurance. And you mentioned TRID. You want to talk a little bit about TRID?
So TRID just took form and it's
What is
another.
it? Tell everyone what it is.
So TRID is another government regulation on the industry. There is no more HUD settlement statements. There is no more HUD. The CFPB and TRID has come up with a new closing disclosure. There are tons of regulations that I don't want to get into because it'll take all night. But there are websites that explain what TRID is. Once I give you my information,
Why is that important to title?
so TRID is a governing body, and there's timing issues and when you can do what and who has to send the closing disclosure form to different people. So because of that, different lenders and different realtors have different relationships in the transaction, and it's really important. And I really feel strongly about this. You know, the lenders that are doing business nationwide, okay, have a governing body to abide by. The title companies are the ones that have to work with all of these different lenders and the settlement agents to get on the same page, quote unquote. And when I say that, you know, pre-HUDs and fees need to be disclosed up front. So, for instance, with us, when you order a title or before you disclose to a borrower, we have our clients emailing us, and when you get a formal confirmation after you've ordered a title, a pre-HUD is automatically sent back to the client. And why is that? Because they need our fees to disclose. So a lot of these lenders have gone to third parties like Closing.com, Closing Corp, Real EC, which is a third-party vendor management system that manages the interaction between lenders and title and settlement agents. To manage everything from the time at which it takes to turn title around to the closing fees, and the mortgage softwares like Encompass are now integrated through these third-party vendors with our proprietary software. So, for instance, we now have to provide our national fees, which are state regulated and don't change, to these third-party vendors, so they upload them into the system so that when a mortgage application is taken, the lenders have those templated fees in the system, so they're on the same page with us. So, you know, there's a lot of rules and regulations. At the end of the day, the bottom line is that the borrowers have a longer time period to review documents prior to closing.
Right.
And I think that any good banker, any good broker, any good loan officer or mortgage professional has already been through this process. And
So
they
you're
have reviewed the final numbers.
Well, we have Mike on the line. Mike, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, and I'll just say, I mean, again, we truly believe that TRID was actually a change for the better, because, again, what it does is eliminates where, you know, if a consumer is giving figures day one, that it's not going to change drastically. It's not like they're going to go to the closing table and find out that they need $10,000 more or the fees are higher than, you know, so now it's as Glenn was saying, it's more important to make sure that maybe a little bit slower in the beginning, but you're making sure that you're giving the right information and figures to the client. That's not going to change throughout the process. And even on top of that, you know, the days of the client waiting to get a call from the lender the morning of the closing saying, hey, you need to bring X amount to closing, is really done. They're going to have 3 days to review it. They're going to know the numbers. They're going to make sure that it matches up, and they're going to be fully aware of what needs to be brought to the table. You know, what TRID does, it just eliminates a lot of surprises, right? There's not going to be any last minute, oh, we forgot this, we need to add this in there. It's just kind of keeping us all accountable on all parties, whether it's title, attorneys, real estate fees, everything is, we're all going to sit there up front and say, okay, these are the fees, this is how it's going to be. There's not going to be a change. If there is a change, actually, it actually has to go back through the redisclosure process. So nobody wants to do that. So they're going to make sure they kind of, like I said, double check the numbers before it goes out.
Okay, well, Mike, I want to address that. You know, I actually disagree with some of that, because before it wasn't the bank that said your numbers are. It was the lawyer, like I did, let a borrower know day of, and they said, oh my goodness, I never thought of the biggest cost. What's title insurance? So that was day of, and what does TRID give you? 72 hours better? It's not a month earlier. It's 72
No, but they're
hours.
getting disclosures. They're getting disclosures with the fees in the first, as soon as they
Like,
take
it
the
was
mortgage
good
application.
Faith. It was the good faith.
Right.
Right in the very beginning,
but
and
now
then
those
3 days
fees,
prior to
right?
closing.
But now those fees are locked in
I
stone
understand.
outside of change of circumstances. Okay, like a double notary fee. So your borrower, there's two borrowers, husband and wife. One's in one state, one's in another. We have to add another $150 for another
But
notary.
there was on the good faith title disclosure on the title amounts,
Correct.
which
And
were
you couldn't-
ignored.
But you couldn't go over a 10% threshold. Now that 10% is different. Now there's a change of circumstance box, just like there was with the good faith estimate. But everything is told in the first week or the first 3 days
First
of
3
that,
days,
that
yeah.
application being taken, okay, and the program in which you're locking into as a mortgage company.
Right.
So now it's not 72 hours. It's they're getting the fees up front. Now the only changes that could be made are changes that go along with the process, and then they have to not only change them but redisclose the whole program. If you
3 days
change,
prior to the closing.
Michael, what is the time frame if you change the loan program and you have to redisclose it? 10 days?
No, technically it's 8, so, because it's the 7-day disclosure rule, but you couldn't close them sooner than 8 days. And that's if you're doing a program change, changing it from one product to another.
Well, that's changing. I mean, before, there wasn't a rule before.
Minimum 7 days.
There wasn't a rule before.
No, you
Right,
could
and
change
those
it
changes,
immediately.
You can do it right there at
Right.
the,
It's a
at the
problem. It
closing
happens all
table.
the time. That's an innovation and legislation to guard against abuses. We know that.
Of
but
course.
as far as if you go lockstep, the good faith had the title numbers, so does the disclosure now.
Right.
People ignored it, and they'd say, whoa, what's title insurance? What's the biggest closing cost? Which does, I'll speak locally, have a mortgage tax.
Yeah, but
here.
let's put it back on the consumer. If you're getting documents that you're signing and you're signing off on, and you're supposed to read those documents, and you have the information the first week, then it's not on any of the professionals that are providing
Okay.
that information. Then it's on you as the consumer to not read the numbers or not ask questions before you sign those disclosures.
And towards that point, I'm glad we have Mike as the lender, we have Glenn at the title firm, and Victoria the broker, because I have a special place in my heart for realtors. Why doesn't the realtor talk about title from the time they're seeing houses in the Buick to the time they're getting their offer accepted to the time they meet their lawyer in New York for a contract? Why do they leave the biggest economic factor that they're going to face up to someone else?
First of all,
Right,
wait,
no,
can I
yeah,
just-
I was
it's
gonna
not
say
the
that.
biggest economic factor. The broker's fees of 6% are a lot higher.
They're not
and
paid by the buyer, but that's another conversation we had. They're
Well,
not written.
technically.
They're funded, but why do they leave the mortgage tax, the title
Okay,
premium?
why are you
the
assuming
recording
that
charge?
all brokers do not talk about title?
I'm
That's
making
number
that because
one.
of my awareness of their practices.
Okay, so once again, every single show that we have, no matter what the topic is, you always ask that question, and my answer will always remain the same. That is the reason why you really need to choose the right broker to represent you when you're either selling or buying a house.
Okay, what's your experience? In your experience, not your specific, but in your observation of others, is
Yes, there are many realtors that do not talk about this. Because once again,
Because they don't know
this
enough
is,
about it.
Yeah,
Why-
this is the
They don't know
most-
enough about it. That's what it comes
It's
down
the
to.
most difficult part of the
I
transaction.
do-
A lot of people are not familiar with
well,
it.
Glenn, let me get you
I
back
do-
in New York.
I do
you're in New York.
presentations.
So in New York, there's condos.
Right.
Forget about calls for this. Do the New York brokers that might be listening in talk about title insurance?
They talk about closing costs, and I think they talk about insurance as part of those closing costs. Do they break down the fees? No, they don't. Not a lot of them. Some of them, and I work with a lot of realtors
And they
do
shouldn't.
it.
You know,
and they
they're-
shouldn't. It's
they
not their-
shouldn't.
I don't mean a breakdown, but maybe
Wait.
that it exists.
So
No, what a broker should do is give you the process of where you're going to go
Correct.
from very beginning to the end. They should tell you what the costs are, what you're going to pay for, not necessarily the specific cost, and then turn it over to the
Do you
title
think they
company.
do that, or do you
because
think they leave it up to
I
the
think,
lawyer?
Glenn, you
I
even
think
said there are
that good-
times that you tell brokers to step back
I
because
do.
this is a misunderstood
I do,
portion of the transaction.
I do. So here's how I deal with realtors in New York and in Florida. The same. I'm not selling houses. They're not selling title insurance. We have our own roles. I'm not a banker. Mike's a banker. We each have our own roles in the transaction. A fluid transaction goes when all of the members of the transaction can work together in the best interest of the buyer and the seller in explaining everything and getting the transaction closed.
Right.
I have
Everyone
a lot
specializes in what they
in
do
what they
best.
do. Now, everyone has their own ideas and knowledge of the other's industry, but if you're working with a proper group and a group of professionals, everyone can
But I
rely
stay
on
on the
each
realtor
other.
because the
Wait,
realtor
wait.
is the first point
Hold
of
on,
contact.
hold on.
And then the
Well, not
transfer.
necessarily. What happens to the guy who has $1 million in Chase and goes in for a pre-qual first into the branch before he gets referred to a realtor? So
You
you're
expect that
wrong.
Chase guy to give him some disclosure. Right?
What about the guy that comes in that's getting relocated and walked into Williamsburg
once
and is
again-
renting for a month and now walks into a local branch and knows nobody? So that's not the case all the time. But realtors, what they should do, and this is my opinion, and I've listened to a lot of quality speakers talk about this, and I fully agree with it. If you're taking a listing as a listing agent, okay, your responsibility. And if I was a listing agent and I was taking on $2 million townhouse or a $200,000 deal, I'm going to make X amount of dollars. I have to reinvest in myself prior to taking that listing. I have a lot of agents that work with me directly, and they are willing to pay the cost, and I don't upcharge. Okay, whatever it costs me, I provide that information. Remember, title insurance is also an information provider to the realtor, okay, for him to disclose before he takes that listing. For instance, you're in the North Shore of Nassau County, and you're the listing agent going on a listing appointment, and the seller bought the house 30 years ago, and there's a barn in the house, right? She bought it as is because 30 years ago, lenders, no one cared about a C of O for the barn.
That happens
But
all the time.
It happens all the time. So I work with agents that email me, hey Glenn, I'm about to take a $6 million listing on a property in northern Nassau, okay? I'm not sure that this barn is legal. Can you tell me?
Not.
It's definitely not. And it's going to cost $15,000 to remove. And you know what? Even if you have an all-cash buyer and there's no C of O and the attorney says, okay, we'll deal with it, we'll use it because we have horses too, whatever the case may be, when they go to sell a property, the same thing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I
The
think it's
buyer
a
problem.
realtor's responsibility to, number one, do their own research, okay? And if they have to pay for it, they pay for it. You know, if it's homework.
There should be probably a cost on the brokerage.
The
not
same thing with the,
individual.
whatever, that's a different topic, and that's not up to me or the broker
And
to
each
decide.
situation is different anyway.
Of course, but I would think that doing that homework is important. Now, if you know that there's no issues, and you can go on Acris in New York City and see that there's no major issues, and you want to do a judgment search, it costs $35, whatever the case may be, to make sure that the seller doesn't have any major issues and it's going to cause a closing issue, fine. But I tell the realtors, as you said before, you're the professional, you got it to contract, you got the inspection done, or you got the survey done because you had to let the surveyor in, or whatever the case may be.
Appraisal?
You got the appraisal taken care of. You pretty much did your job for right now. There's not much more that they can do, okay, unless something comes up, and then they need to be the shoulder to cry on or laugh on or talk about with the transaction. Then it has to be passed on to others. The worst scenario is when a realtor tries to get involved in everybody else's facet of the business, okay, and they're
I
calling
agree.
the banker, and they're calling the title company, and they're calling the attorneys, and there's nothing that anybody can do because we're waiting for the borrower's new W-2s.
See,
Or
I absolutely agree with that, Scott. And you know,
I'm talking pre-contract. He's talking.
well,
at contract.
even at contract, pre-contract doesn't matter. The broker's job is to go through the whole checklist of the process of the
Correct.
transaction, not to get involved in every little detail of it. You know, as a broker, you know, you wouldn't go in there and say, okay, these are what the rates are. This is what we. You're not going to do that. You're going
Right.
to say, this is
Stay
what you
within
need
what
to
you
do.
know.
You need to talk to a qualified lender. You need to understand where the rates are to make sure that you're getting the best. You need to understand the difference between an adjustable and a fixed. Same thing with title. You know what? You are going to need title. Here's what the process is. But you know what? I'm not going to get involved
Right,
in
here's
what the
Glenn's
title
phone
company
number or
does.
email
He knows
address.
it. I got
He
it.
knows what to do. Just like I wouldn't, you know, you asked me the value of a property on Hell's Kitchen compared to for a 4,000 square foot compared to Chelsea. I wouldn't know the difference. That's not my job. That's not what I know. If I know that, it's because I've studied that industry. But
But even
it's
if you
not,
know it, it's
but it's not my
something you're going to
responsibility.
advise
Correct.
to someone. You're
Correct.
going to say,
I wouldn't
I know a
in
little
good
bit about
conscience.
this, but you might want to talk to so-and-so because
And
that
it's
person
very
is the
easy
expert.
for me to deal with